It is 2 o'clock, so it is this Newham local plan examination hearing session is now open. I'm William Fieldhouse, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State. Benefit whoever wasn't here this morning. This is Sophie Edwards, who has been a planning inspector for a number of years, working on planning appeals and another caseworker, not yet local plans, as part of her training for conducting local plan examinations next year. She's spending a couple of days with us here in Newham. But just to be clear, I'm the inspector solely responsible for this examination. Sophie's simply here to observe, and she won't be involved in the decisions and recommendations that I make. I'm very pleased whether to switch the mobile phones, laptops to silence. Further out through the door there, going around to the right, on the left. No fire alarms tested this afternoon, so if the alarm does go off, we need to evacuate the building through the door, into the lobby, left, out in the front door, along this side of the building to opposite the DLR station. So this afternoon we're starting matter 4. Matter 4 deals with part 2 of the plan, which contains policies related to 17 neighbourhoods and the neighbourhood policy for each of those 17 areas, along with the site allocations within each of those areas. And for reasons I can't quite remember, I started the last neighbourhood, N17. Let me give you the biggest and best allocation. Anyway, so that's what we're doing this afternoon. But before we look at N17 and that allocation, we'll see more general matters relating to the approach to neighbourhoods and allocations and going to deal with it, whatever. But before we do, can we just go around the table and introduce ourselves? Starting with the council.
Hi, I'm Lily Mahoney. I'm principal planner at Newham.
I'm Cinta Vincentes, place shipping lead at Newham.
I'm Rory Dowds, I'm policy planner at Newham.
I'm Tonya Mariano, principal policy planner.
Hi, Sally Edmund, interim.
Austin Pimpin, consulting.
My Lawrence, principal planner for Barney.
I'll be with some Cox architects representing the
James Strong, KC representing AU.
Emma Lawrence, strategy housing expert on New Evans, representing EIM. Rebecca Burnham, planning director, representing Homes and Barney.
Julie Stevenson, partner at Monty Evans, representing Aberdeen Investments, and my apologies for Brian Kelly from Aberdeen, who's meant to be there today, but unfortunately he's
Okay. Will he need to attend another time on this?
Hopefully not so.
No,
We'll see if we can make progress today.
Okay, thank you. Right, so I won't go through any of the other introductory things. I think everyone will be aware of those. We're going to look at some quick general points, I think, about the neighbourhood sections of the plan. So first of all, just to be clear, that there are some modifications that are relevant to this. First of which is that in part 2 of the plan, the policies are, in this case, purple shaded N17 box, but not the white unshaded box with the heading vision. Yes, yeah, that's the neighbourhood policy. And for the sites, policy is in the box, which is in this case entitled N17.SA1 particular side. So that is development principles, design principles, etc. So that's policy. The actual box with the same heading, not policy. And the map would be modified to delete map, so indicative diagram. Yep. Yeah. So that's what's been proposed by the council in response to my questions so far. So that's the background. You made a general point in your matter statement, which I thought I may as well just acknowledge that I've read, which you don't repeat in subsequent neighbourhoods. The site allocation policies are central to achieving the London and good growth objectives. Focus on building strong and inclusive communities, making the best use of land, living the home that London needs, and growing the economy whilst maintaining resilience and efficiency. And the allocations are sufficient to keep the strategic priorities of the neighbourhood and provide a clear strategy for bringing forward sufficient land forward and at a sufficient rate to address objective access needs over the planned period, in line with the description in favour of sustainable development. That's the intention of the totality allocations, which is a matter that we'll go through as we go through each allocation and in the subsequent consideration of the overall capacity. It's 5%. Any questions or points about that before I just come on to the first sort of issue under this sort of general point, which is that the submitted plan does not identify how many homes or square metres from non-residential development it assumes will be provided, or it proposes should be provided on each allocation. What we do have now is the latest position from the council about what the assumed capacity is for each allocation and the trajectory for that allocation. So that was published on the 24th of November, the pro forma the 8th. Yeah, so for each allocation, is that pro forma completed? And that has a figure or two figures in it for capacity. It's 8 sites, I think, got range, the capacity range.
Yeah.
Yesterday. Yeah. And they take account of the plan-wide capacity testing summarised in document ED3 and information about the data that's informed the housing trajectory as at the 1st of April 2025. So that is the document that is also reflected in the overall trajectory, which is, we get to really talk about in any substance. So that's the position. That supersedes any capacity figures published on the PQs or whatever. So that's the latest position that we've got here. So for each of those sites, we've got a format along with the trajectory. Sets out the start date and the rate of development for those. You can have to so William, have you got access to those? Yeah. Fine. Okay, so that's what we've got. That's the most up-to-date evidence. So the only I'm going to look at that on that basis. So the question I want to explore now is it necessary to modify the plan to include some reference to capacity, the amount, scale of development on each allocation. So each allocation policy starts with development principles. It starts with a sentence which sets out land uses or types of development to be provided on the site. And then there are further details about some of the things as we go through. But there is no clear statement about the scale of the site. I think the council's position up to now and in its matter statements is that it isn't necessary to modify the plan, and you can explain why that is. You can explain why the plan is effective as it is without any indication of scale. I will just point out a context that the PPG 61.02, where sites are proposed for allocation, sufficient detail should be given by clarity to developers, local communities, and other interested parties about the scale, about the nature and scale of it. London Plan Policy B1 Part 3 talks about following a design-led approach, establish site capacities for site allocations. Boroughs are encouraged to set out acceptable building heights. Scale, massing, indicative layouts for allocated sites. Where appropriate, the amount of floor space which is provided for different. So that's background. So just elaborate on why it doesn't need to provide any indication of scale for the different land uses.
Yeah, sure, thank you. So I mean, we have obviously discussed in depth whether to include capacities on the site or not, and there is obviously arguments for both for and against, but ultimately looking at the capacities that we've arrived at, having them in the sites can cause a rigid outcome of looking at what we could deliver on the site. There could maybe be a set where it constrains the design-led or the evolution of the site. It can also, in some instances, and maybe not everyone around the table, say that it inspires applicants to deliver a quantity instead of the quality of development that we really want to see. We're very clear on the principles that we've set out within the site allocation policies, which I think alludes to the legislation you just set out in terms of floor space for different uses, key principles of how we want to see the site go forward. But I think setting out that unit number or the capacity can be overly prescriptive and therefore conflict with the policy D3. We've also set out why we've, and D1, where it does align with that. But also we set out in the 5.8 note, introductory note, why we didn't submit the capacities alongside. It is just one form that you could bring a site forward that arrives at that number. You could have a general part figure, but I think we've seen that the capacity can range quite greatly, but the principles that we've established have robust evidence to support those, and they're the real key drivers of that development, ensuring it's sustainable. And the capacity of the number can be quite different to what maybe we want to see.
Understood. The policy requirements will still have to be met.
Yeah.
And all the other policy requirements in the specific policy requirements and all the other policies in the plan and the open plan policy. And the figure could be quite really caveated as being indicative and it's subject to. So that would go some way to addressing the concern.
Yeah. It becomes a little bit in the game at that point, and I think the principles are the key thing. And we've taken that stance from the adopted position to provide clarity of what they're to address to those sites. The neighbourhood provides the vision, the capacity provides how that can be delivered. And the capacity figure can come form in such different iterations that it almost seems overly prescriptive and inflexible to include that.
An alternative, I suppose, could be actual statement, because this plan is going to contain a housing target based on a justified overall capacity, which is made up of primarily capacity of the allocations in the plan. So it begs the question to the user of the plan, well, where's that capacity based? How does it relate to the allocations and what's proposed on the allocations? So the reason justification, I suppose, for each allocation policy could be that the overall housing targets and the trajectory for them is based on the assumptions about this stuff, i.e. a capacity of, or in the case of one there's a range. And then that could be explained, well, that is not a policy objective or a proposal or a whatever it is, and got to caveat it, that it is what it is. And it is what it is.
Yeah.
And it has been used to do a job, hasn't it? So you don't have to, decide that. And I'm just exploring what. So unless there's anything else you want to say, I'll invite views from elsewhere. Be interested to see what people think about all this. They may want the flexibility that a without indication of scale provides. So, brilliant.
Well, I think you've just summarised our position, which is approach, not including figures within the site allocation. I think we do think that this affords flexibility and affords a genuine design and approach. There are assumptions that sit within the evidence base that obviously inform the housing target. I think we'd be nervous about that translating to site allocations, particularly for sites where perhaps there's a difference of opinion over that site capacity. As soon as a number is included, I think people can become quite fixed on a number, regardless of whether there's caveats about it being minimum or appropriate or approximate. So from our perspective, yeah, we really welcome the this instance.
Aberdeen?
Yes, I'd just very much like to support that position because there's been a considerable amount of work, for example, on the allocation of the foundation this afternoon, and that's done through the OAPF process. Throughout that, one of the debating points was actually capacity of the site, whether we had transport implications, general site capacity related to local areas, and sort of led down a bit of a rabbit hole. And obviously, since there wasn't a full agreement on a lot of matters, but wasn't full agreement on any single matter, it probably meant it was going to be very difficult to reach the national number.
Sorry, where did this number, sorry?
We had a discussion in the preparation of the Opportunity Area Planning Framework, which was a joint discussion going on with William, Aberdeen, and manager. Just basically, this was probably last couple of years ago. So the
Plan includes a figure for OAPF.
That's right,
Isn't it?
Yeah.
But this is part of an OA.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was quite a lot of an overlap between the two sets.
Yeah.
Just given such a big strategic subject, you don't normally get that because it's particularly decent census was one of the major applications wasn't it? Going into this council.
And remind me how the London plan figures. It's an indicative figure, was it? Opportunity areas.
Yeah, the experience, I'm sure. So it's a starting point from which you actually interrogate further using the appropriate. Obviously, does.
Yeah. And it was expressed in terms of dwellings, was it? And
that's right.
Industrial floor space.
Dwellings, industrial, but particularly in terms of there was also at that stage greater attention to commercial floor space.
But where did this opportunity area? Where did you end up with a figure for this particular application?
I haven't got it really to hand. I've just looked at that.
Well, I mean, so someone thought about how you break down the opportunity area into
So the
GLA driven process.
Yes, we
I
have
see.
the GLA assumption. We know the GLA assumption for veterans inside of 10,000 homes.
Okay.
We've obviously got an application. There's one which is 3,000 homes, which includes 7,000. It's not set out in the OAPF.
No.
It was recently referred to in the Town's Task Force report, so it is in the public domain as that opens about that assumption.
Okay, but the point being, once you get a figure, however it's derived, that has led to site planning difficulties. Is that what you're saying, or a rabbit hole?
It reached a conclusive figure because there has not been that level of interrogation, which is allowed by other policies to work out what's appropriate and what's not.
Yeah.
Particularly when you get to a large which have different planning issues on the control.
Yeah. So having a figure isn't helpful. No. And is it unhelpful?
I mean, it's helpful to have a trajectory, I'd say, in terms of where it's a substantial allocation, which gives an indication about all levels of dwellings per hectare. It doesn't really go beyond that.
But, so you're satisfied with the approach of this plan, which in words describes the aspiration for the neighbourhood and the opportunity area and the allocations in those areas. So that's sufficient to provide this clean and get as much as possible.
Yeah. and our design.
And design principle.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's right. AEIM.
James Strawn from AEIM. It's somewhat cautiously, but similarly adopted that approach of what the design to the capacity. I say cautious because the logic of where the plan's got to in terms of housing is that it's now sort of capacity led. And so there's an obvious logic being able to work out how to arrive at the numbers you have for the key allocations, which are based on some assumed capacity. But for the reasons which I won't get into now, we obviously have very serious reservations about the capacity assessment, and therefore being fixed at that capacity, it's expressed in the neighbourhood policy, I certainly think would implement the approach to considering applications would be a bad thing. So there is a bit of a tension between those two things. But can I just, because it's a methodological, I don't know, it's like a, but EBO 03, which is the capacity study, tells you that there's a different approach to different sites, as far as I can work out, perhaps if I misunderstood it.
Yeah.
You've got site capacity testing that took place at the stage.
Yeah.
And that was based on 2022.
Yeah.
And then you've got a review post-2018, but that's only been done for certain sites. So a large number of sites, or at least a significant number of which there's never been a review of the capacity post-2022, which brings in the other concerns we've expressed that come to talk about what would be assumptions.
Yeah.
So we're torn in that sense. We definitely don't want to be capacity and outdated. But on the other hand, housing numbers are being calculated on that basis. On balance, we therefore favour not reflecting capacity numbers. If they were to be reflected, we think it would obviously to be justified, effective, and sound. You would have to do the exercise under the sound capacity assessment, which we say hasn't been done, certainly for our site and for a significant number of other sites in accordance with what I've read with the OD3.
Yeah, I think it is. It's broken into two parts, 3A and 3B. One is the ones that were Reg 18 tested, one was the other is the ones that were subsequently.
And there's a table
in terms of explaining how the overall housing target, capacity-based trajectory has been calculated, I suppose that can be done in an alternative way, which isn't setting out the specific figures for each of the allocations. It could be done by reference to this was done. This overall figure for the borough, this target, was capacity driven based on a fact about what the evidence was that it was based on, which then you really have back into it, go back and see what it was for exactly. Was without putting those figures into the plan.
Factually, that would be correct in the sense that's what how the numbers will work out. The danger we foresee is that when it comes to development management control, there's some weight attached to the capacity assessment beyond the merely factual. That's what we do, whether or not it's a good thing at the time. And that's just the nature of when you record something in a plan to say this is how you did it.
Even if it wasn't recorded,
So, I mean, one way around that would be some caveat. This factually wasn't but any application should be based on the design.
Okay, thank you. Right, back to council.
Yeah, just to clarify something about the methodology and the site capacity summary. It's divided in three parts.
Okay, I think you might need to speak up a little. I can hear you. You look that way and I can hear something.
It's divided into two parts, and the first part is about all the site applications that have been tested before regulating by microorganisms, and then the second part is what we tested, just if there was some representation about something that changed into evidence based. But if your site is in the first part, that means that no changes are. We haven't rerun the tests again to all the sites. So your site has been tested in the first 2018. And then the next part is about the locations that have forward as new site with targeting consultation, and we have tested. So what I want to clarify, there was no change in policy evidence in your site, so we didn't have to test the site again.
Okay. So, so just to be clear, you're saying that the ones that were tested in 2018.
So basically, the part, what is in the second part was tested with you.
Yeah.
But then we had to
do something more.
Do some
yeah.
modifications.
So they were all tested.
Yes.
There weren't any new allocations brought in after regulating. What if there were?
A few, and they are in the part.
But anyway, all the others were done. Everything was done.
But yeah, and they follow the same methodology. So they follow the same methodology of optimizing site capacity. Right. And yeah,
and that
have the same typologies of buildings, same depth. So the methodology is exactly the same. It's just they have been done in different phases of one.
Yeah. So ED3A introduction starts off. Section will include the sites that have been capacity tested by Crane and Lavington as part of the new characterisations. Yeah. And that was this 2022 study. It was available on the regulator. And so as far as you're concerned, nothing is out of date about that study and the approach it took. It's at a level and it's consistent, but you have to update some of the ones because certain allocations or sometimes changes have to change or something significant change. You need to do more work.
Yeah, or like representation said, like 18, they said, or like this might need to change a boundary or anything.
Yeah.
That's why.
Right.
Thank you, James Strong for EIS. That really confirms what I was saying, faction. The problem with that is because, first of all, it doesn't reflect changes, i.e., that goes back to conditions or that have been started, substantially started. It's not apparent to us that that explanation is entirely consistent with what we've got. In our hearing matter statement, we identified for you that there was a change in relation to our site, TVZ16, tall building, for example, because it went from tall elements within large master plan areas to tall elements within constrained master plans. So there's been some further work done to downgrade our site because of what's going on. I don't see the explanation of that, so I don't understand where the change is coming. And of course, the other thing that we pointed out earlier was that in 2023, for example, GLA guidance on characterization capacities post-dates the 2022 work. It comes out in 2023. And so the stuff in history with the 2022 capacity assessment. And I don't want to make it site specific. This presumably applies to any other site that's been similarly affected. For example, on our site, there's the 12 trees that come forward, buildings built, I think, since 2022. And yet there's been no assessment of the consequential effects on capacity, whether driven by tall building, environment, or anything else, in making that capacity assessment. So that's why we're very concerned about it. And they're restrained there. principle, but that's our big concern about that dated effect.
Okay. So, and the concern is would be increased if the plan included a number.
Yes. I'll understand whatever number it is. Yeah, that's dates from it.
Yeah.
There is a problem, I think, for both sides. The capacity study only came out, they're only revealed, I think, no transparency, for example. We're now discussing them in the context of the group forward plan, where you're building up capacity investments for sites. It's very unfortunate that capacity study growth, which has only been revealed to us very recently.
It was for the reason that I had to ask. Where is
So
it?
you can see where it's coming from.
I think it was probably a bit earlier than November, but take the point. It was. I don't know. Anyway, it's fine. So yeah, understood.
Just one clarification is that, because it has been this morning as well, that the LPG, the Authorization Group LPG, was published in 2023, but the draft that we have consulted on, so if we had access to this draft documents, and we started to do that methodology before, so it wasn't out there.
I can add to that in the sense that when we did start the characterization study, we worked really closely with the GFA, agree that this methodology was coming up. And even the way of assessing the borrow with regards to a thesaurus of type of morphology that Historic England themselves have developed for London, we were forwarded that specifically early on in the process, knowing what the new sort of follow that process already, it was just a draft. And there's not been a significant difference between the draft and what was published in the end.
Okay.
I just said the proof is in the pudding when it comes to looking at our side, which I'm not going to do now. But can we come back to that?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Test that when we look at our sides, we look at factors in there.
Check. Yeah.
Opportunity areas, for example.
Yes. Okay. So this was just about the principle of including figures at this stage. So that's fine. I mean, it helps, and I think well, there isn't anyone putting an account. We've been doing I fully understand the particular circumstances in this plan why a figure could be unhelpful. So understood. And no one has put a strong case to suggest otherwise. So that's where we are. Okay, thank you. So unless there's anything else on that general issue about so one of the things about the details for the sites and the problems, we'll just go over one by one as we go. So unless there's anything else on the general point.
I don't think.
No, of course not. No, that's fine. I was going to say, I'm just going to, the last general one was about site allocations. Obviously, one of the things that referred to in the colleagues, it's one of the riskiest parts of London in the country. And so that's sort of known, risks and but anyway, the long and short of all that is, that has all been addressed. It's been addressed to the satisfaction of the employment agency, and there isn't any outstanding issues about the process, the approach, the policies, the sequential testing, and the exceptions. So there's no outstanding issues there. So I don't think I've got anything to raise. I don't think anybody else does. So on that note, we will just have a 5-minute break before we just move on to N17. Good, and anyone who's not directly interested in 17, interesting it may be, and makes business sense. Thank you.
Oh, you're doing it?
Yeah.
You can begin.
I thought that was like a ghost.
Yeah.
Okay, let's resume then. So we're on to N17, and we have one allocation, and we have the protocol I referred to. We have the questions that I set out. It meant to be an exclusive list of issues to address, but people responded to those, and if there was anything else that could have done so. First question is there anything anybody wants to say about policy 17? What the council wishes to say? No. Okay. So we will move on to the site allocation. So, the document will attach to a box. We've got an indicative diagram showing how the principles and the development principles, design principles could be provided. So that's, I suppose, just on that issue. So we've changed it to indicative diagram. Let's add that modification. Is there any explanation of what you said in response to why it's been changed to diagram in the plan? Because you said it is one. I don't know how you expressed it, but it is a way that you could achieve these things, and that's what you illustrate. It is not the only way.
Exactly.
But does the plan need to say that?
I think within the diagram it would look like, but we'll have to include a clarification point if that is helpful. But yeah, that's the intention.
We'll take views today and then we can explore it again, I say, but a bit more explanation may help. Because otherwise, they're helpful, it's clear, but because they are clear and they're quite specific, you have to think people take that as a starter point, don't they? So, do you want to just comment on that before I go through some site-specific things on the allocation?
Yes, you don't want to. Just as a matter of principle, I think it is helpful. It's now clarified. But I think it would probably make sense if we could agree some wording about what that really means and what indicative actually is defined as, because it's a high-level diagram, but there are implications coming out of that diagram, I suppose. Just by means of example, there is a substantial area for green space right in the middle of the roof, probably covering quite a few areas. So obviously, that might be an issue for our clients. So it's a matter of really how helpful and how descriptive this is used. Because there are certain things, like the DLR location, which are very useful, because they actually reflect discussions about how the DLR line has actually been reached in our client's site. And my neighbour's site here actually sort of work together. So I think if we do that diagram remains, it's got to be very carefully described about how things are, because the last thing we would obviously object to is just if that is in a particular area. Some people would look at it afresh and saying that's in a particular area of green space and associations, problem, and actually object to that.
Yeah, because it could be an indicative diagram. It could be interpreted as being, well, it's indicative in the sense that it doesn't put very specific values, but the broad locations are as they should be. Whereas if you explain that it's an indicative diagram in the sense that it is a way of laying out the site or whatever, to accommodate the development and achieve development principles, but there could be others. That explains it a bit more. Yeah.
Yes, no, sir. Right. I think particularly this allocation has been subject to quite a lot of work in the past, and probably not in this session. We'll talk about the master plan, which has emerged through probably 4 or 5 different iterations. So we're just seeing you actually have this as the main policy diagram, which doesn't, I would say, align with what has gone before, not least in terms of Fred Lavington's piece we just talked about a few minutes ago, and so the other.
It doesn't align with it. I thought they were based on the characterizations today.
No, in terms of that green space, the green space point in particular, it's a fundamental one.
I think, yeah, they have been influenced by the diagram that we did do an iteration of Reg 18 that had quite a lot of higher level more detail, on the allocation, but ultimately that was almost prescriptive from a more simplified approach that has been influenced by the master plan work. There obviously may be some movement now within the green space, but ultimately the principle remains. I think this will be picked up in a later matter, but the need for green space is a requirement on the side. Where that ends up is obviously through the master plan process, but the principle still remains, and this does follow kind of the workings that's been going on before.
I think we might have just indicated why this is actually a problem in terms of the slide answer.
Yeah, I understand. So there would be elements of it that are helpful because it clarifies the DLR and there's certain things that, finding the sill that's there and needs to be retained and you're working out various things. But other things may not be justified because we can talk about the specific requirement for green space. I think it refers to a certain hectareage, does it not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that may be all. And then why show them here? But, okay. So I think that does confirm.
Just to clarify, we actually welcome the approach to just limit down and make it more principle-led. So very much do that. I think there are, particularly in terms of by means of green space, it creates conflict and also in our view it's not justified.
Yeah, we'll come on to the green space requirement. But it may also be the case that what is shown in an indicative diagram for one application isn't necessarily has to be shown on everyone. So, for example, on some applications, it may be very clear where the green space ought to be, but on others, it isn't placed. Bigger or there's more variables in it. So you don't have to show everything on it, but to be consistent, I think.
Just
yes, probably useful proportion and relevant and just for each particular allocation rather than saying, oh, we've got a formulaic approach. We've always got to say grid, we've got to show some grid, we've got to show some people, we've got to show whatever.
I do agree. I think there's maybe then it kind of uncertainty about the key principle because that's still always a key principle.
The location.
Yeah, I think maybe if for some it's not on and then some it is, it may cause confusion.
Because okay, well, we're going to go through this discussion. Actually, locations are there. So that was helpful. We've noted some explanation. Let's leave it at that for now. In principle, some explanation of what indicative diagram is and what it's intended to show. Come back to it after we've done some different discussions. So yes.
Just to point out that some of the green space that shows there is part of the green space designation. It's not at 6, so they are an existing feature of the site that potentially could be necessary.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not a completely.
No. And again, this is that vary side by side. Exactly, sometimes there's things that are fixed, like the showing whatever. So that, so it's more indicating what's going to and indicating where things need to be provided to achieve the principle. Right, okay. We've got this example. We can come back to all this. So we want to say essay one. And I've picked out certain parts of it because they seem to have a particular justification for they were raised by the presenters, but it wasn't meant to be an exclusive question. So if there's anything else anybody wishes to say, we'll go through them in turn. So the first one is the DLR, or semi-transformative transport intervention. Now, there's been a modification moved on, DLR extended commitment to research. Now, that is a given, and there isn't an alternative that needs to be looked for. Okay. Anything you want to say about that?
Yes. I think that's what I was going to say. Obviously, really support the site allocation around.
Something to be taken.
Yeah. But we've worked really collaboratively, I think, with the team work and collaboration. We obviously proposed DMR line extension as well, which I'm sure goes without saying, and we've been part of a steering group with key stakeholders over the last few years, focusing on this DMR line extension. Obviously, last week's budget confirmed the renewed commitment to DLR, which notwithstanding that, I think, in reality, it will take many, many years for the DLR line extension to come forward. It's dependent on public and private sector funding. And I guess our concern at the moment is what happens in the intervening period. The way that the policy is structured, does that completely sterilise this site allocation until the DLR line comes forward? And that's why we had originally suggested the alternative transport measure as a mechanism, not at all trying to move away from the DLR line extension being more priority, but a mechanism of trying to keep development going and moving forward, so that we're not just sitting ducks for the next 10 plus years for the DLR line extension to rebuild. We know TfL don't like the suggestion. That's why the qualification has been made, and we slightly related, but under Max 10 around co-design and piecemeal. We had a lot of commentary around what can happen in the interim. It's very relevant again shopping centre, which is the existing asset that needs managing. It's a position as well, which we can talk about today or in the next session. So it's tricky, but trying to strike a balance here. So we support DLR line extension, we really do, but we also need to find ourselves in a position in the next how many years to do anything.
Yeah, understood. So you're suggesting that now that the transformative transport improvement is going to be DLR, so it's not going to be too transformative. So that wording has to go.
That's exactly.
Yeah, but it's tying it to the DLR construction contracts.
I think it's about having an allocation that is so black and white, and perhaps it's just looking as if with or without DLR line extension, and it's seeking clarity. And this might be the wrong matter, and it might be to turn around the design, but it's just seeking a bit further clarity around what could be done, perhaps in the intervening period for the DLR line extension.
Have you drafted some modifications to this?
Yes.
Okay. But if we look at first column, the last paragraph, so the modification gets rid of the alternative transformers, and in the second paragraph. But then it says until the lot contract is made. So which specific parts here only occur on the southern section of the site in easy walking distance to the existing DLR station?
And that's fine, because we've just brought forward that application.
So that one's okay.
So yes, that is fine. I'm just trying to find the specific.
Which is the specific there.
Yeah. It may not be that we specifically are seeking an amendment to the site allocation. It might be more for BFN2, the co-design policy that refers to piecemeal development. They're kind of related. And also
Just read it through. You provided a map, haven't you, of your ownership and the phases. So you've got St William's phase 1, and that falls within this southern part. Yeah, so that's
along with some land by the GLA. That does not come forward just yet.
But that would be allowed by this policy.
It would be part of.
And then you've got St William phase 2.
Yeah.
So would that be allowed by the southern part of the site? Wouldn't. And is that the concern?
Yeah. So anything basically now outside of our phase 1 application, which we're for, and the GLA land which sits to the south is technically what referred to as phase 2. So the rest of that site allocation is now, it could be interpreted as sterilised into the DLR line.
Is that the intention? Phase 2 has to wait for the DLR contract to do that.
I think, yeah, for the contract to be, I think the understanding phase 2, I might just need to check on that because I hadn't really understanding. But ultimately, the policy within that we had is to allow the phases to keep going until it's let. But obviously, construction will go on further than that. And I think there is a preliminary timetable when that contract is looking to come in. And I think that's end of next year, 2028. So I thought the understanding would be that it wouldn't be sterilised, development can continue.
I think there needs to probably be further clarity.
I can take that away.
As read it, given that scenario at the moment, is how it would be interpreted.
You could interpret the St William phase 2 on your plan, taking on the southern part of the site as well. I mean,
yes.
You know more than I do, but all I'm reading is this, and I'm thinking, well, what actually got still being defined on this map. We've got DLR station middle, partly on the Gardens Rich shopping park. White area, which presumably is the developable area, because the other bits are green. There's a bit of
yes, I guess that the point is, I suppose, there's a lack of clarity of what actually can happen now.
Right. But other than that, it doesn't talk about phasing in here. That goes back to what you were saying about BFN 2. Yeah. It's how that applies.
BFN 2 is codifying.
Yeah.
And it talks about piecemeal.
Yeah.
We can fit into that.
Yeah. Okay.
Is it worth?
Yes, okay, so I speak to.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Yes.
Well,
I was wondering whether yours related to my point B or just. Oh no, go on. Say what you're going to say.
I mean, I think once again we're very much supporting what the allocation is trying to do, and obviously supporting the recent announcement relating to the DLR. But we would very much like to echo what Williams says. Actually, the site is sterilised. The first phase has gone forward, and basically nothing can happen unless the DLR does progress to the next stage. And our concern originates from our experience, I suppose, with other major infrastructure projects like Crossrail 2, where there is a risk of sterilisation when everybody says, yes, it's going ahead, and then until the moment it doesn't. And I think what we would like to do and explore with the owner themselves there is actually to find out what that scenario looks like when it doesn't go ahead, or there is a pause. Because at the moment, I think it's portrayed as being something very black and white. Contract less, it goes ahead. But there's still multiple stages to go through, Transport Works Act, and additional funding which follows through. So it could be less than 10 years of nothing going ahead until the DLR happens. And the reason why that's important is that the, for example, a live asset like going through shopping model development side actually is something which is working. It is actually funding the DLR design. So this is the reason why the policy, unfortunately, as it comes, doesn't sit with no alternative scenario to capture that. Doesn't work for us.
So you back to the alternative scenario being an alternative transformative public transport.
It was the reason, the origin of that policy wording was because of the I'm sorry, I'm talking about because a huge infrastructure like project like this, its very nature, and therefore is there something which can be done that actually allows something to happen. We're not, to be clear, we're not saying the whole thing happens, 100% not. But something does happen to allow the ongoing funding of the DLR business case to allow more flexibility.
Who is the contract? You then So once that contract's let, there's a lot we have to happen before you can be certain that
And after.
yeah, sorry, after, yeah. But you would then be able to get permission for the rest of the site.
I don't think that's completely clear, so
Right.
that's the reason why we have to clarify. If the contract's let and process continues and the DLR stalls or funding is withdrawn, change of government usual way, as an investor, we need to have certainty that the process can continue rather than something coming to ground.
And the fact that you've got, so even if you've got permission shortly after the contract's been let,
Yeah.
it will be subject to the conditions and Section 106 agreements, etc., which may be in effect.
Yeah. So this is, I think, policy can help us all here. We can actually have cash what happens if in a scenario where the DLR doesn't go ahead. I think the contract being let, the actual budget announcement was 2.5 lines said, and obviously we're very much supportive of what was said on that. But my experience over the years is that being a few announcements like that to various different budgets saying everything's going ahead, like Crossrail 2, doesn't know if it doesn't. This is this obviously is an important side which actually is really talking to and actually supporting the growth agenda like that. So we could suddenly find ourselves in a situation where, for whatever reason, not even adversity, but nothing can happen, then we're actually sort of in conflict with that land policy.
I think so. Okay, so we've got two nameplates. So
I was just going to say, on the point of the contract being that was the kind of, we can provide clarity that is the intention. So then it doesn't cycle development, that obviously works can go alongside while the construction's underway. And in terms of the kind of transformative infrastructure piece, it is necessary for a level of infrastructure like the DLR to come forward in that area to unlock that area for growth, because it does have a very incredibly poor peak tower. So it would be working out what kind of is that transport piece if it isn't the DLR.
But going back to the submitted plan, you propose a modification to say the submitted plan is not sound before they decide if you modify.
Yeah.
So flexibility that this plan has submitted as it may be necessary is one way of addressing the concerns that are mentioned here. So I may decide that, well, you don't need to delete that. It's the way it's expressed now, yeah, that's fine. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And if not, flexibility to try and make another way forward. I think that's
just to introduce myself, James Campbell, Senior Planner for Revenue. I'd just like to draw your attention to TfL's matter response on this topic. It sets out their position that early developments of parts of the site ahead of the construction contract would be an unsuitable development, would basically undermine the business case of the DLR in itself. They're being quite clear that's important. Currently, Crossrail 2 is a bit of a misnomer, because that is a scheme that doesn't have funding allocated to it. This is a scheme that does, and the TfL is very strongly going ahead with it. And the kind of the timeframes that they've indicated to us and indicated publicly, I'm sure you're aware, is that construction could begin as early as 2028. We're not in the room, we're not the people making those decisions, but we consider that doesn't necessarily start with
I think it really has to, because that's the position of the DLR led to the appeal, because it was being refused on the basis of that on the comprehensive development master, which we're not going to talk about now in this session, but also in the DLR.
okay. Okay, well, yes, I understand. We'll leave that one with me now. I think about that. In particular, that modification is necessary. So the question B was about whether the requirements relating to the scale, location, type of timing zones in relation to the vision of improved public transport, which I think we sort of talked about, but it's looking at it in a slightly different way. Obviously, as you say, this is premised on PTAL presume. Yeah. Because at the moment you wouldn't completely, but so is the opportunity area. I suppose. So I suppose this question is about, we talked about specifically about the southern section of the site. But for example, the going retail park, the transformation of that into a town centre is dependent on this infrastructure. So it's the other elements of that as well. So there's anything else you want to say on those aspects?
Yeah, I think that I won't go back to the flexibility point because obviously it's the same point.
Yeah.
So if you can take it over, because obviously it's part of the strategic side. It's greater flexibility will allow, once again, funding to take place. This, just to clarify for the benefits, the income from Gallons Reach is being used specifically to help fund Aberdeen's input into the strategic sort of modelling going on and the sort of business case. So the two are inextricably still linked. So what we want to do, what Gallons do, and Frank would actually say, unfortunately, will be available, is that Northern Pipe needs to be capable of active asset management to avoid sterilisation. So, to allow that continued funding in the business case, which we all want, which is the ultimate outcome of the DLR extension. So, once again, if nothing can happen for whatever reasons, and to be clear, we're not talking about such major transformation across the we're talking about that development and that change from a strategic path into a town centre. If you actually sort of get the success of it, the place-making part of it is turning it into a town centre, then you are more likely to deliver successfully the growth and homes. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg here, allowing. I don't think we've all been working around the table for a long time to work out that chicken and egg. If you can actually start that change to deliver facilities which anybody coming here to live would want and actually would expect, and it's not just about retail, it's about other community and social services, then you're actually likely to have that place making and to be able to support that growth wherever it ends up and whatever numbers that the Newham to actually deliver. So we've all agreed, I think, around this table, and hopefully I think from the Newham side as well, that the town centre is probably going to be where the existing shopping path is. So to allow that change to help the place that's very, very important.
So in terms of this, these are questions B and C. So just to understand this, the Galleons Reach shopping park as it is now, to transform into a town centre, would be a requirement. Would it? Or could it?
We haven't reached that conclusion yet. I mean, what will happen is there is, elements to a very large car park, which obviously is naturally stable to try and actually sort of intensify rather than going into different years. There's an area of undeveloped land in phase 2, which has got permission, which hasn't been implemented. And one of the things which we would imagine would happen is that if you were having the transformation of town centre, it would be closer to a mile away and where the new DLR station is, rather than tucked away at the back of the site. So I'd imagine what we would do, and what Aberdeen would actually be planning, is to actually develop basically more conventional town centre uses, we call it that, closer to a mile away and DLR, and you end up hybrid. That's probably some retail warehousing because it's really serving a strategic need.
Okay, so there would be a sort of high street created, a new high street near the DLR.
Whether one introduced, which is what we want.
And the existing type buildings, the centre, if you like.
And a lot of them we would hope to be developed as well.
Maybe,
because we would want to actually just have this cluster around the DLR station. So mostly what we have been trying to master plan together in the different iterations.
Okay. Okay, understood. But the point that you make about this not restricting the existing rates in the short to medium term is about allowing the role to not be completely stopped in need.
Correct, and to me, But to assess, we do not, we've agreed we've never certified any conventional asset quality tests. It would still be treated in this interim period as a park as it is at the moment. But I think it's more the case of actually how this more site-specific policy isn't used as another reason to actually block it.
Okay.
Which otherwise might be acceptable to our test.
Right, so points we've been talking about. Do you want to say anything about this?
Yeah, I can come in.
What the intention is?
Yeah, sure. In terms of the town centre transition, is that the
Well, it's about the timing in relation to the infrastructure provision.
Yeah.
So the town centre would come when that's done.
Yeah. Is that, so, and I think that the flexibility that we have in the wording is around that. I think it going back to that contract being let, it was obviously not for the construction to fully happen. It was to allow the development to work alongside. And then in terms of the town centre, we did put forward a modification.
If I can comment on the town
Yeah,
centre
sure.
element. So there is a chicken and egg situation we've been having for many years, unfortunately. The problem we have is the retail and the public environment. And up until the station realignment, streets, etc., come forward, there's a lot of master planning involved in order to create the town centre that we all want to see there. And the problem we have currently is between managing what is and will stay viewed as a centre retail park, as they also recognize that it necessarily is, and growth until it is suitable for it. A town centre is different to a local centre or a neighbourhood grade.
Yeah.
In the sense that it will draw people from the wider area. In that sense, it needs to have the appropriate infrastructure to support that, and it doesn't. And that's the key risk here and helping it, and that's what TFL have also raised in terms of their support for the master planning to come forward alongside the DLR, that being the stage at which the town centre comes forward. And that aligns with the London Plan SD7 policy, which says that in terms of intensification of after centre retail parks, it should focus on improvements to the public rail and public access, so public transport accessibility, and it should not result in increase in retail function. So that is a key point for us. And it's how, even with the modifications we've put forward to both HS1, 2, and also in HS3, because this isn't the only that we have in borrowing pattern. It's about understanding that yes, there is a role for these retail parks. They do serve a function, they do serve a population, and you'll find loads of evidence in the retail leisure study just about how important this particular retail park is already for borough's residents. But we need to be very careful not to intensify the main town centre uses floor space in a way that is outside of this broader master planning.
Yeah. That was actually really well put. So it's a really complicated issue. Well, obviously, for the first point, which I think the council's correctly saying is maybe an opportunity to differentiate Canning's Reach from other retail parks, because Canning's Reach, firstly, is not a bulky goods retail park, it's a fully open retail park, which has access to delivery as a shopping park. The retail studies, which have been done, not just this one, but previously, have also recognised correctly it serves a strategic function in two ways. Firstly, it's serving this part of East London, and also it's been reviewed quite a few times in terms of the relationship with other town centres in the borough. Obviously, it operates at a high level. Yeah. So what does that mean in terms of the next step? You know, has some accessibility by public transport, has buses going in there regularly, which actually are reasonably well used. But where I think perhaps things have differed and changed now is the amount of floor space we're talking about. You know, the change which previously has been looked at, you know, when we actually had significant growth in shopping centres and retail parks, has very much diminished that. You know, there's been a structural change. So what I've done, I believe, actually look at what one thing to perhaps encourage Newham to explore is, if we don't have a substantial increase in floor space, which we do not want, and we actually want to reinforce what's there, how do you control it? And that's to actually deliver that change where it is actually operating in town centre, people already going there, so we're not going to be fundamentally changing that shopping pattern, and therefore sustainability issues. But we do want to change the nature and type of uses, and so to encourage our better usage, which probably physically we to actually accommodate that as well. So we're encouraging, you know, to perhaps work out maybe a slightly sort of halfway house where we can actually sort of work together to deliver, particularly now we've got great use of DLR.
I mean, this policy is about development and redesign into the Galleon Park, and then reference to HS1, which is about transformation of the district. Yeah, that has to wait.
Or does it, sir?
Well,
I mean, because in things now,
I
think our observation would be that things are incremental now. The days of doing a Stratford Town are longer. And actually, where you're going to successfully deliver this, and what we encourage the council to work with us and perhaps with your input, sir, is actually how we can work out how that transformation can take place incrementally. Because the reality is going to be too much value.
Yeah, I think there's two policies in the plan that relate to this. I think there's this timing in relation to the letting of the contract, and then what happens, and then this reference to significant amount of redesign, and there's HS1 or 2. I think they are the I'm not quite sure how you, other than say in relation to this, policy wording should be active asset management of the existing shop park will not be hindered.
Yeah.
But is that a policy, or how would you change the wording of this or the HS1? I mean, there's other policies about out of town shopping that allow certain things. I think that was sufficient.
Yeah, I think this is where I policy, and I think it's about the application as well. As we mentioned, there was an appeal at the shopping centre, the 2 drive-through units, where the policy was being applied in a way that we wouldn't like it to be applied, which is unhelpful. So I think it relates to this policy BFN2 about codicide resisting. That policy talks about resisting piecemeal development, which was used against this application. So it's about seeking an amendment or clarity around how a policy would be applied.
Which policy?
Well, this is where it relates to policy BFN2, which doesn't work with the site allocation.
I will look again. I think we've explored this probably as far as I can understand. I'll look again. I did look at your conversations, but I haven't. Now I will look at them again. See the way you listen here in relation to this. And we're going to come on to HS1 time. So maybe we'll come back to it then. So I think I understand at this point. This isn't so much about the timing; it's about what happens until there's,
That's right.
this takes.
I mean, may I make a suggestion, sir? Would it be possible perhaps to discuss, given the positive comments which the council's been making, just to see if we can make some ground, because we're obviously all going to be sitting around to talk about that next matter together, and maybe we can make some progress, amending some wording, maybe providing some clarification. I don't know.
Well, I think you'll probably suggest exactly what I was going to suggest. Probably in an action plan that I've actually sort of sat down there, but is about just maybe having a discussion between the parties and identifying quite specifically which, drafting something that reflects the sort of nuance of interaction between presumably the policy and the plan about how to centre shopping parks at the moment, HS1, 2, and this, and how each thing can work together short, medium, and long term.
Yeah. And be inventive.
And be inventive. What we do before Christmas. So when we come back in January, we can talk about what you've got.
May I have a clarification question on what the scope of this action point might be? What if we end up with no agreement on a modification? Is it just about providing clarity?
Let me think about that. I think I'll point to the bits of the plan that I think you want to talk about and to address, see if there's anything. I mean, first, I'm not totally sure is what you want, but what's in the, I can understand what you think might happen and like that, but I can't quite work out what it is in this plan that is causing the obstacle to what you think it is. But so that,
I think.
Well, maybe I did read your thing, but I didn't think about it fully enough because one of the questions I had was about what actually is what's happening to the existing shopping park to create a new high street, and I think I'm clearer about that now. But it's not total demolition and clearance of the shopping park; it's evolution of it, and it's tied to the public transport improvement. Okay.
19 phase 1 proposals that have resolution to grant towards the neighbourhood grade. Obviously, the side is large, and we're bringing forward that southern parcel, which will have local neighbourhood uses.
That's irrespective of the town centre.
Exactly.
And that provides a service for that. Very much by that.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another council representative.
Very brief point. In discussions with TfL, we agreed it would be inappropriate for us to follow the approach that Barking took with the extension of the London Overground to Barking side, where they had a granting condition that limited occupation of a certain number of units above a certain level until the station actually opened. So that limited number of house resident units can be occupied to a certain level. Obviously, that's would be a lot more restrictive approach to the approach that we've agreed with the TfL, which is obviously a construction contract impact.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. So is there anything else on my questions A, B, and C, which is about the relationship between the development proposal here and the timing of the transport infrastructure?
No.
Okay. So I will draft something and I think we can go to the list on that. So the next question was about the tall building heights. There was a modification for this one, isn't it, to reflect this variation authority. So that's back to the same discussion about tall building zones, etc., etc. So with reference to tall building, well, let me just sort of remind myself. The tall building zone is all this allocation, isn't it? Just get that. And it's got the very heights.
I'm looking at LCD4 actually in sentence, but it's TBZ5 Gallons Reach, which incorporates N17 Gallons Reach and N17 or SA1 Vector as well. And as drafted, that says 32 metres, so 10 stories, and 40 metres, so 13 stories, and 15 metres, so 16 stories in defined areas. We provided a markup to reflect essentially what we've secured planning for within the Vector Riverside phase 1 proposals, and B, to seek an amendment to align more closely with the London City Airport height restrictions. This area is relatively, it's lacking sensitivities in terms of sort of surrounding residential We don't think that there's a reason to limit height here, aside from the obvious CA height restrictions. So we're suggesting a maximum height of 80 metres, which aligns with the London City Airport.
Yeah, okay. I'm going back over the same things we went back over this morning. This is another specific example of a planning permission and a character area. Justification for the height limits here.
Just to clarify, the permission was granted just a few weeks ago,
Yes,
a month
it's
ago,
not-
so it wasn't really.
It's resolution to grant.
And it's a resolution to grant, yeah. So as explained this morning, we didn't take in consideration the starting point for the overall the pre-op conversation, and so this is reflecting all the analysis and the site, as we said, it has a low PTAL and it's depending on the DLR extension. Now we know there is a certainty, but and it is subject to airport constraints. So we apply the lower parameter here, and ranging from 32 to 50 meters. We allow the 40 meter parameter to unlock phase one, which we know that was closer to Gallions Beach and could come forward without the DLR, and then 40 meters to 40 meters to the first phase and 50 meters in the rest, in the north part where there will be the DLR and the new town center, which we think that can support more growth. And in regards to the airport constraints, we know that we have a statement of common ground with the London City Airport, document SOCG 005. We agreed some changes to reflect that conversation needs to happen when a site is constrained by proximity to the airport. You also suggested 80 meters to go up to 80 meters, but the table that London City Airport has submitted to us set a limit of 50 meters. So for us, this shows the reason why we didn't want to constrain the height based on the London City Airport, because we know that this range can change when they have pre-up discussion. So we have done a landscape approach based on the context. We have considered the airport constraint, but not use that height threshold as a limit, because that is just a threshold from where you have to start to consult the London City Airport.
So the solution that you agreed with
was to add in every neighborhood to add a reference to TF5. And then airport, and also in the tall buildings. I don't know if we have submitted actually with the latest modification, but also in the tall building we are adding subject to airport constraint for consistency in all the areas that are within those constraints. We had already some of that wording, but we have done just a sound check against the people submitted by the London City Airport.
So has anything changed with this recent grant of planning permission for 80 metres as opposed to the 50 metres here?
I don't know why they have. Yeah, they have
the 80 metres is not to
meters.
do with phase one. So the heights in phase one extend up to 16 stories, and the 13 stories for the phase one area.
Yeah.
So there's a slight discrepancy there. We don't have an issue with the reference to London City Airport heights, consultation, or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just making sure that the maximum height prescribed is justified and that there's a clear rationale for that maximum height. And if London City Airport saying it's 50 metres rather than our understanding it was 80 metres, it'd be useful to understand why that is. What's the difference between the two heights?
I think what they have submitted to us is this threshold from where you have to start to consult. But then when you have pre-application discussion and you consult them, they assess more specifically. And we have that in some cases that have been above the limit that has come to us. That's why we didn't want to be locked on that number. Mm-hmm. We were just trying to understand what was the best suitable height based on the context, and we align pretty much with the development form and scale that has been developed in Gardens Reach. So, 40-50 meters is in line with what has been the emerging context in that area.
I think just to add that the height limits are set outside of the planning process as well.
Yeah.
So the airport could apply to the CAA to introduce a new aircraft that has a slightly less steep slope, for example, and the height limits could change.
But this 50 metres maximum height range for this TPZ, it's not airport. That's not set by the airport. It's set by the context.
So we're saying, I think we have a slight difference of opinion around the context. Because we're saying it is not a sensitive area. It is an area that people could take more height and should be maximised.
Yeah.
It's the largest allocation.
And it also has its own context.
Yeah.
So it's not set by the airport. The airport.
It's more like landscape approach and understanding of the character and hierarchy, because we have established that Stratford, the major and metropolitan center would be the places with higher heights. So this is not, we won't have the same role that Stratford has in the borough.
No, but it's going to be a massive transformation. Capacity is not in the time period, but for the whole capacity is.
Well, we'll have a discussion about that.
Yeah, so whatever it is, yeah, so it's hard to see how you can fix on a 50-metre height when there's such a transformation and such a changing context. And that, unless you're saying that there's some sort of visual relationship with Stratford's got to be taller than here because of its different role, is that that's it?
Yeah, this is what's on the landscape height hierarchy that we established, was that we were assigning tallest cluster based on the hierarchy of town center and people. So the areas that have higher footfall, Stratford is metropolitan center. So we are setting the highest parameter there and then stepping down to towards the rest of the area to be more sensitive with the context. And it has a lower. So this is just following, the methodology.
So those are the three things about the heights within the zone. The three things we talked about. The third of which was the remaining character.
Yeah.
What you're saying, the remaining character is not all change so much.
Yeah, and there is a context.
There is a context, yeah. Okay, it's the detail and the level of this centre and the primary limits on the 50 bigger.
Point is that if we go higher, then we need to think about what's going to happen in Stratford, because if we want to maintain a townscape strategy hierarchy. Otherwise, we'll be more like we can change height here and there. And it's a different approach, but it's not what we have envisaged so far.
A couple of observations. Firstly, at the moment, we're supporting tall building height near the proposed location of the town centre and DLR. So I don't think there's many differences of opinion about that. I suppose we can comment about we have not really seen any evidence base in terms of townscape strategy to differentiate why this area is lower than Stratford.
It has to remain lower than Stratford.
Other than just because Stratford's a metropolitan centre. That's the only, we haven't seen any evidence base over the years really to understand the difference between the two. We've been working with this area for quite a long time. So I don't think, I'm correct, there's actually any document which sort of explains that particular strategic point.
The townscape, the tall buildings annex, and we have. So
Yeah, we talked about that this morning.
Yeah,
and it's-
and there is a diagram that explains the hierarchy.
I suppose the most supplementary is we talked about earlier on about the capacity studies and the Cane and Lavington piece. What we are more significantly concerned about is that leads to a very, very different figure to what we looked at previously. So obviously there is, as has led to heights being looked at. Our concern really is whether there's any agreement about work should be undertaken there. This is a very big difference between about 7,500 units and 10,000 units. That's a big issue.
Okay, right. I think we've done what we can on the building heights. It's, as I said this morning, there's various things to think about. And as we talk through these different examples, it helps to understand them. We haven't got a lot more to do, but I just wouldn't mind a 10-minute break till close to 4, and then we'll come back. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the application is just an assessment, right? But the context yeah, it could be that simple nature. I did one a year after I joined.
Yeah.
I'll try. Yeah, because he's not even in. It's like he knows it would be like that. No, sort of what you kind of got there. Oh yeah, that's just good noise, isn't it? I mean, yeah, to in the newspaper. Do you not need specs of rubbish?
Yes,
So if you look at it, yeah.
So development should deliver an automated vacuum waste collection system to service all pathetic waste. Okay, so that's an unqualified requirement. Is it an established system in Newham?
We haven't had any systems, MVAC automatic vacuum systems in Newham as yet, but we have included requirement in the plan, because as years we've been dealing with schemes of increasing densities, there's been a real concern from our waste management colleagues about logistical challenges of servicing such a high number of units. So we've sort of looked to test that through a indicative kind of scheme within TP, so that's topic number 6, which talks about automated vacuum requirements and the amount of space, time, and reduction in vehicles that could be servicing the site's waste production. We've also looked at the requirement in the viability report plan that concords broadly that in terms of the effect of this versus kind of other policy requirements in the plan, that the impact on viability is relatively limited, but the policy will be applied in the round, and if a development comes forward that suggests that there are going to be significant challenges in delivering this requirement, then we would have to refer back to policy BFN4, which talks about prioritising different viability asks, and that's bring up the plan. So that's policy BFN4 3, which talks about the prioritisation of different viability asks through the application process.
This would be one of the priorities.
It would be considered under the delivery of required infrastructure, but obviously that's alongside affordable family housing and local employment and training. So the officer would have to make a consideration in the balance.
I think the main point about this is it's an unqualified requirement. And does it, as a system, does it have to be a comprehensive system implemented across the whole area, or can it be done in bits?
I don't think it would necessarily have to be across the whole area. I mean, the application that's recently come forward for this site has agreed to leave its condition that looks at the feasibility of providing this within later phases of development, so it wouldn't necessarily have to come forward on the whole comprehensive site. When we've spoken to the provider of this technology, they say roughly about 400 units is kind of the bottom level of kind of development that could be serviced by MBAC, but obviously if you're going that small, it's going to have much larger implications on the viability, whereas we kind of deliver the requirement at a scale that we think is appropriate.
Well, I think the way it's expressed isn't subject to any caveat, is it? I mean, that's the point from both of you. It's about subject to practicality or viability. But I mean,
well, that's the main point, and that's how it's played out for phase 1. So, as mentioned, we accepted a planning obligation which required us to commence in the second phase of phase 1 to submit a feasibility study to the council relating to the delivery of an MBAC system. So it's just shifting it away from a hard requirement to something that, we're not against the principle of it if it were to work, if it were to be viable for the correct number of units, but we really need it to shift away from being a prescriptive requirement to reflect how it's been dealt with in phase 1.
Isn't it like all these things, these policies set a clear aspiration, if you like, but when it comes to development management, it's always a matter of balancing off different things and taking account of viability. And so, do you have to qualify every requirement by subject to something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it does relate to comments we'll have later on BFN or contributions, but it's the cumulative impact, isn't it? And if that flexibility isn't made clear, then when the plan is picked up and there's a requirement for something, I guess it's kind of, you have to justify if it's justified.
I mean, so I suppose there's two elements to it, isn't there? One, the viability thing, and we're going to go through, and this isn't now we're picking up the examples as we said we would as we go through. So here's one that will have a cost, and therefore you may have to do a site-specific viability. But the other one is about whether it's practical and feasible at the time when you put your application in, but that would then be presumably it wouldn't be a reason not to allow that scheme if it couldn't, if you could show it couldn't be done for a practical reason. So that element probably isn't significant, is it?
No. Our preference is for it to be, a tweak to make it
Okay.
there's some flexibility, but
Okay.
we've seen that flexibility in practice, so it's not one of our more substantive.
No, okay. Anyway, I've got the wording that you've dropped and you made a good point in everything subjective. Okay. Right, we'll move on to the active sewage treatment work. So this is a very large, one of the largest sewage treatment works. Yeah. So, but there's modifications proposed here to M17 and this particular location policy. Sorry, there is a.
Sorry, yeah, sorry, I didn't know.
I was stuck up with you. I was trying to read my note. So this would be to include a requirement that any necessary mitigations are completed ahead of occupation and development.
Yeah.
So there's a process to go through. This work has been done. We come in there, but it's not conclusive. Further work is needed.
Yeah.
Thames Water's position still seems to be that you can't know yet that development of all of the site could be mitigated. There could be mitigation to allow development of all the sites there. I don't know what they actually want.
Yeah, they still have reservations.
They have reservations. But the policy is to ensure that the mitigation is provided for development.
Yeah, more like clarity of when that's coming forward.
Okay, so I'll bring you in a minute. Is there anything you want to add about, again?
I think phase one was a good example of dealing with this matter. Phase one did benefit from the part of the application that's furthest away from the treatment work, so there weren't actually any sort of major adverse impact on odour. But there was some council an independent review carried out. So, with Red Thames Water staying on the ground, and it's hard to see how much further it can be taken. There have been over 4 independent separate odour impact assessments carried out. I think the way that the site allocation is worded at the moment we're quite happy with, because it allows it to be dealt with on a application by application basis, where you can look at the levels of impact from odour for that particular parcel of land and work out what particular mitigation you need, because it does depend on the level of impact that is experienced by and the uses proposed and the design and everything else. So as drafted, we're happy with the wording of the site allocation.
And that is design measures should minimise exposure to odour from the active sewage treatment works and poor air quality from the dumpster. So that's the policy.
Yes,
it is. Okay. So you don't think it's necessary to add that qualification about making occupation?
I don't think we have a strong view on it. I can see where that model has come from and in Thames Water's position. It's something that we would have to do anyway. With phase one, we put in some mitigation measures in our design code, so it's something that we thought about quite early on in the process, and we're not shying away from the fact that the databases will have larger impacts than phase one, so it will be something that needs to be looked at and mitigation to be considered. So,
I suppose it's quite remarkable, isn't it? If you have a planning condition of a section 106 to require mitigation, it would be subject to this sort of occupancy restriction.
Yeah.
I think from our perspective, that is we're slightly closer to the serious one, is that we feel that the way it's appropriately dealt with is on site-by-site basis, because as part of the determination of any application, you're obviously going to make sure you're tackling the odour issue at that point in time.
But that's what
exactly. So rather than actually requiring delta basis in terms of occupation.
But that, if you did your
assessment, and also so you got mechanical ventilation, then actually the mitigation is in place at the point of determination of the application.
We have a condition if it's helpful on phase one, which it was in outline. So it says for any reserve matters application, which includes specific uses, residential, education, hospital, within an area that's over a certain level of exceedance, then the odour impact assessment that's been submitted with the application must be basically updated and include odour mitigation strategy to address any adverse odour risk. So that mod kind of aligns really with the information that we've already.
Okay. Right, Mr. Cogan, thank you for patiently through the rest of the afternoon. And yeah, I mean, Thames Water's outstanding concern. I'm not sure what they really said it means what they actually want, but anything you want to say on this?
Yeah, sure. So I think the whole point of the independent review was to bring together all the different assessments that we've done and Thames Water's own assessments to bring everyone onto the same page so that these exceedant buffers are essentially established with all parties agreed. So it makes the litigation easier going forward.
Yeah.
That was the point of the study, really. It's then down to developers to put forward a scheme that has some sort of mitigation and can demonstrate that it will be effective. Provided that's provided, then under determination it will be accepted or not, and go forward. Thames Water position will no doubt be objecting to anything. It's a risk to them in their minds. But provided mitigation is provided it's useful, there should be no reason to not allow permission. So
yeah,
that's where it stands really.
And from your point of view, there should be a solution.
Yes.
That it should be achievable on this site, with appropriate design and layout, etc., etc.
Yes, exactly.
So there may not be a solution. You would agree with that assessment?
No, I think if we look at the Aberdeen site, for example, it's the nearest one most at risk. At the moment, there's retail there, and there's been one odour complaint in the whole history of the site.
Okay.
So that gives you an indication that actually for retail use, the shopping centre, town centre going forward, it's going to be very limited in terms of odour risk. The risk is more towards residential use, and if that's set back slightly away from the land use, spatially orientated in a way that protects that use more, and those uses that are less sensitive or close to that, then there's a reason why you can.
And the sort of proximity, that's quite significant, is it? The odour disperses reasonably quickly.
Well, yes. So the contours you have seen are essentially a worst case situation. Most of them there won't be any odour.
No.
So it disperses depending on the wind direction. Yeah. So there'll be things where, for example, just an example, you could have mechanical ventilation with filters, and you could have smart technology built in to open windows when it's the wind's going the other way, waiting to flow the way, and you could have it closed when there's flowing water. There's lots of things you could do to mitigate. So
the way this policy is expressed here, as far as, I don't know, you may not be an expert in drafting plan policies, but I mean, it flags the issue and it requires mitigation to minimise exposure through design measures. I mean, that's totally appropriate from your point of view. Thank you very much. Anything else? No.
Just one point. So I don't want to take up too much time. It's referred to in 1.15 of my statement, and it's more, I suppose, back to the diagram, or whatever that's calling it. It's basically a level of green space region and the industrial buffer, which we understand has been partially had an eye to the odour. We very much completely concur is that there really has not been any odour complaints besides the retail park, and actually physically the retail terrace actually does serve a purpose of when the wind is in that particular direction, and even before the additional mitigations were put in place by Thames Water, which should definitely improve things anyhow. It was actually quite effective in that way. So I don't think, from our perspective at Aberdeen, there really is a justification to actually have a physical response in terms of a layout and master plan to what we're talking about. I think that can be correctly dealt with as development comes forward and the application process comes through the process.
Yeah, okay.
This may not be the right after the examination to deal with that.
Yeah, that's okay.
But just for that,
Obviously. Okay, thank you. Right, so anything else on that particular question? No. So it just brings us on to our question, which was written before the latest capacity information was provided in trajectory. So I think difference of opinion about what the capacity of this site is. Insofar as if the plan is to remain silent on that for the site, it's not so much an issue. Because if that would be addressed within the process, etc. But just to understand that this 7,378 is the one that the council is assuming within the trajectory for the overall.
Yeah.
And that being, what it is, that's the evidence that you have, which I think is proportionate to justify that level. But for the reasons you said before, you don't want to be tied to a figure for this site. And the bigger the site, the more complex the site, I suppose, the more variables there are about how that could change. You can achieve these things. And, there's no point in trying to discuss whether 7,300 or 10,000 is going to be more appropriate, really. It's the flexibility that is the key thing.
And exactly right. We agree. We don't want the figures, the site capacity figures in this application. Particularly in the area.
Okay. In terms of the trajectory and timing, so we know that there's these phases, and you've seen the EDA pro forma starting in year 3 from adoption to a third, 2030 basically, I think, and then going ahead at 200 a year and then increasing to 400 a year. So this reflects your discussions with Newham, and
So it reflects our understanding from we've got our information that we had available. I think probably from the planning application that was recently submitted to the site about when the site would start, and then this site applies our limit of 200 homes per year market absorption rate. So you'd be looking at that starting in 2039, and then you'd be looking at how we phased it for this particular site is we looked at the first phase coming forward from 2930 onwards, and then for the kind of post DLR that we modelled, we looked at that coming forward for a long-term phase of the plan period. So the phasing for that 7,300 figure would extend beyond the plan period as well.
So this figure, it would be 3,200 or so. Figures in the plan period. But it's not tied to that, and that's just what they built into the trajectory assumptions.
Shall I just make some comments?
Yeah, please.
So the 3,000 homes is what's been presented on resolution for phase 1. It's a complex site in its own right. 42 applications, one to do with remediation works and one in outline. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've got section 6 to get over the line. We've got remediation to be carried out. We've got RNAs to submit before we can even get on site. So realistically, unfortunately, I think the delivery might not come forward as soon as this trajectory assumes. By the time we sort of map all of those actions out. But that 3,000 homes we do anticipate would be delivered within the plan period to 2042.
But this, if I'm looking at when we come to one of the things that I have to try and do is work out what the final will be in the years for adoption. So it's kind of crystal ball gazing, but that's why. So you're saying that exceeding 600 in that 5-year period after adoption
may not be
maybe a bit optimistic.
Unfortunately.
Okay. Okay, well, on that, I know that. Which brings me finally on to where we started yesterday morning, back to viability.
So can I ask one final, perhaps it's actually a question, which
Yeah, sure.
It's not normal format. How do we actually deal with this point about this? One of the documents which will be putting around when we all look at applications in the future will be this evidence-based and dual will about McLean and Lavington kicks out 7,000 homes. So how do we clarify that? Because I'm sure we can get ourselves into a situation where we suddenly becomes the cap figure, even though, or some provide some indication of the overall capacity. I'm just thinking about material considerations later on. At the moment, 7,000 is fundamentally unacceptable for us. So how do we deal with it? So I'm not entirely sure.
Well, I don't know how you'll deal with it in the future.
It feels like it just feels like this might be one of those classics of the examination documents which is there and then comes back.
Well, it exists.
Exists.
At the moment, the plan is doesn't have the figures for the sites. Doesn't say how much there should be. It doesn't at the moment explicitly say where the more refer to.
No, that summary the study that we published is for the purposes of the hearings to inform the inspector of the workings that went into the figures. It's not part of the evidence base, it's not planning standard, and that's why we're not.
You might be in the best position you could be in at the moment with the plan as it is. I mean, it's pretty silent and ambiguous about where the trajectory, where these figures come from, and the figures for any site. So that might be the best, given what exists. Yeah. So maybe. I don't think the plan could be modified to magic away anything.
No, sometimes I just smart stations.
Yeah. Okay. No, but, yeah. Okay. So the final point I just want to quickly raise, and we talked about this site as an example, would be viability. And I said that I'd like to just be clear about which land values is most appropriate and which road. I said yesterday, this based on your capacity study. Sorry, your trajectory capacity figure 7328, it was 23, I think. Yeah. It generates a lot of numbers on that, anyway, so you've got to find your way to some important ones to read. So we were on row 23, and we're in, which is the most, this is a complicated site, so the benchmark land value.
So the benchmark land value that kind of relates to it, the secondary industrial for the retail park, and then the cleared site.
Okay. So I'm not going to get too specific about this in terms of breaking down proportions and percentages or anything. So that's helpful. So that's that's BLV2
yeah.
and BLV3. Yeah. So the lower two brackets. So insofar as that helps to wipe out this huge gap between the benchmark land value and the residual value, it's not the worst case scenario. It's the second and third worst case scenarios, if you want to put it like that. But, so that's that work. That's what it is. I mean, you've taken forward these developments, so
Yeah.
You have your own view about what's viable.
Yeah. And just on that document, I'll go back to the capacity
as well. Yeah.
point, which is obviously incorrect in our view, and the site so there's maybe some flaws in the data informing the viability tables. But yeah.
So just on that front, there's different scenarios for different numbers of dwellings.
Yes.
And I'm not going to open, but as that increases, viability improves. Is it?
Good question.
Sorry, maybe I'm carry on what you were going to say.
Yes.
So you're saying that if it's 10,000 capacity, presumably you're going to say, well, that would improve by role.
I don't know if we've tested that. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Carry on.
No, it's fine. All I was going to say is the point that we raised in the viability session is to do with the exceptional admin costs associated with gasworks sites. And on the phase one proposals, we still have that played out where we were only able to offer 6% housing by unit. And in our proposed amendments to the site allocation wording, we have requested that there's a sentence inserted that acknowledges the gasworks specific nature. This obviously applies to our land specifically, which was former gasworks. And it says development should acknowledge the associated costs of decommissioning and redeveloping the gasworks site and relocation of any significant equipment, including to address any environmental pollution and on-site decontamination requirements caused by gasworks.
Okay.
So just looking at something that I guess ties it into that viability piece.
Yeah. The basic point being, now you wouldn't put all this time and effort into promoting this site and trying to take it forward if you didn't think it could be made viable, the development. But that comes back to it can't be made viable with 60% affordable housing and this, that, and that. Yeah. So back to that. Yeah. So you're not saying you agree with these figures, but what you are saying it's a challenging site to make viable, and therefore the plan needs to acknowledge that in whatever ways it can. But all the policy requirements, it's just not going to be able to.
Which is why with the impact discussion, so it doesn't.
Yeah, there's one example.
That's why I sort of hammer home.
And so 6% affordable housing is what you were saying. I mean, the viability of the whole redevelopment of Gallons Reach Shopping Park, I mean, that's quite a specific thing, isn't it? That,
yes, I mean, would you like me to make any?
Well, yeah,
obviously, two factors there: existing use value. We got a shopping park,
which is different from any of those benchmark land values.
Because that's before, there's difference between this is the only existing land asset, and therefore we've got the existing use value point.
So on that, the highest benchmark land value in here is 6.3 million per hectare. So that would be too low for that.
We haven't got looked at responded on that point. We're more than happy to.
No, it's just
there's that point.
But there's a unique.
There is insurance structure. There's gas line running straight between as well. And the other thing we do know about is there is significant capped concrete structures below. So although it's been largely cleaned up as a result of when Bill originally did the development, and there is still considerable concrete structure below the surface of the car park.
So back to abnormal costs.
Exactly. So therefore, what William was saying very much is consistent with our view. So reflecting it, I think it also doesn't undermine the majority on other sites as well, which obviously we would set a precedent elsewhere, I'm sure. So therefore we can reflect it specifically by the nature of this huge gas space.
In Newham, and is there public money to help deliver viability challenge sites or not really?
There'll be grant funding for affordable housing through the GLA's affordable homes programme. So that would be available, I believe, to sites like this.
Okay. Primarily, this is private sector funded, and
our applications in outline, so grant funding. We're not there yet in terms of the timing. No. But we have 6 viability reviews in our what will be our section 26.
Yeah, and that justified getting permission in principle for 6% because of site-specific liability. Yeah. And on the other policy requirements in the plan, and it's only draft, but you were asking, did you have to address other ones as well as the
in the application? So there would have been policies around, I guess, housing mix. I was trying to think off the top of my head. So the MBAC one came in halfway through the waste system.
Yeah.
So that's a good example because it wasn't in, I think it came in the Reg 19 draft. Yes. And Reg 19 got published after we had submitted our application. So timing was just a bit misaligned there with our application. I'm trying to think.
No, it's okay. But the big give was having to, the 6% rather than the 60% was
we're delivering other infrastructure, so removal works and the remediation works as well, which is substantial. So
But they were essential.
they are essential to make.
Okay, thank you. Right, anything else on this neighbourhood or this site allocation that anybody wishes to say? No? Okay. Right, well, we'll we need to deal with this. No, okay, well, it's been quite a long day, we've covered quite a lot. So thank you all for contributions. We're back tomorrow morning, 9:30 on another neighbourhood, another site application. Which it is now, it's 1 to 5. We'll go back to the beginning from the end. So, hi, thank you all.
Thank you.